Hi guys, welcome back to Listography. Today's video we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of counting down records by one band, we're going to be talking about guitarists. Plan on making a series of videos like these. Today we are starting with classic rock guitarists. So just quickly before we get into it, to define what classic rock is to me, basically 60s and 70s radio guitar rock. Pretty much anything you'd hear on a classic rock radio station. Now I know some stations now do include music up to the 90s. You might even hear like Pearl Jam or Nirvana on a classic rock station, depending on where you live. But this video is going to focus on the 60s and 70s primarily. Now this video may also ruffle some feathers. There are some very, very big name, iconic guitarists that are not on my list. Now there are several reasons why a guitarist may have missed this list. Most obviously, maybe I just don't like them that much. But before you get too upset at me for that, I do also plan on doing other videos. So there may be another category that I plan on putting that guitarist into. If they're more of a blues player or an acoustic player, I may be saving them for another video. And also, this video is not based entirely on technical guitar skill or guitar playing alone. Also considering how much I like the music that their band makes and how much I enjoy listening to those records. There are a lot of guitarists that I think are fantastic guitar players that I simply don't listen to that often for whatever reason. So if I'm not a fan of the music that they make, I have a tough time calling them one of my favorite guitar players. So that could be another reason that they're not on the list. I did want to kind of make this list a bit interesting and find some guys that were maybe a little under the radar, but it was very, very difficult to do that in this category. This is the golden age of guitar playing, really, and there are so many big names that it's hard to leave off. So this maybe won't be the most exciting of the lists that I do, but I think hopefully it's interesting to everybody. All right, starting at number 20, I have Steve Howe. Steve Howe is a very unique guitarist. He's a virtuoso player, but not of the shredder variety. And playing in a band with Chris Squire, a bassist who often uses his bass as a lead instrument, and virtuosic keyboardist Rick Wakeman, Howe was forced to find different ways to carve out sonic space for the guitar and, yes, his music, often weaving in and out and around the other instruments. As a result, his unbelievable skill as a guitarist is readily apparent without stepping into the spotlight all that often, which is a difficult feat. For people not into prog, yes often represents the pinnacle of 70s musical excess, but when they were at their best, I feel like they were actually all pretty tasteful players. Sure, their music was complex, but they played very well as a band and didn't step on each other's toes just to show off. If you don't know their music, I would recommend checking out the excellent 3-album stretch of the Yes album, Fragile, and Close to the Edge, especially the track Siberian Khatru from Close to the Edge. At number 19, I have Mick Ronson. Mick came to fame as a member of David Bowie's band, first appearing on The Man Who Sold the World, and remaining a member of his band through the Pin-Ups album. He would also appear on Bowie's Black Tie White Noise album in the 90s, and Bowie would sing on Ronson's final solo album. He also did a brief stint in Mott the Hoople as the band was in the middle of breaking up before becoming one of Ian Hunter's biggest collaborators throughout his solo career. He also had a solo career of his own with albums like Slaughter on 10th Avenue, Play Don't Worry, and Heaven and Hell, which was released posthumously and features guest vocal performances from some of rock and roll's elite. Perhaps the most unusual place that Ronson showed up was as part of Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Revue live band. Ronson was not a particularly flashy player, but his style and swagger brought a power to the songs that he played on. In essence, he's basically everything you could want in a rock and roll sideman, adding to the song, building energy and drama without distracting from the lyric or upstaging the frontman. Some highlights from his time with Bowie would be The Width of a Circle, Moon Age Daydream, and Time. From his solo career, I'd definitely recommend you check out Angel Number 9 from Play Don't Worry. He plays some great leads on Mott's Saturday Gigs. Ian Hunter's live album, Welcome to the Club, from 1980, is maybe the most essential listening of all for someone trying to get a grasp on what made Mick so great. At number 18, I have Robbie Robertson, best known as the guitarist of The Band, who once served as Bob Dylan's backing band before going on to have great success of their own with albums like Music from Big Pink, The Band, and Stage Fright. He went on to have a pretty decent solo career, as well as do some production work and soundtrack work as a frequent collaborator of Martin Scorsese. A great songwriter as well as a guitarist, Robbie Robertson is the perfect example of a guitarist who always serves the song. There are a ton of highlights all over each of the band's records, but some favorites of mine would be It Makes No Difference, Life is a Carnival, To Kingdom Come, Sleeping, and the live version of W.S. Walcott Medicine Show from Rock of Ages. Something There Is About You from Dylan's Planet Waves is also great, but for his greatest moment you have to look to their live concert film, The Last Waltz. Eric Clapton joins the band to play Further On Up the Road. Trading licks with Clapton is one of the few times he shows his full ability as a guitarist, going note for note with the great bluesman. When he shows what he's fully capable of, it makes his usual understated approach and great restraint seem all the more impressive and admirable. At number 17, I have Tony Iommi. Considered one of the inventors of heavy metal and undeniably the master of the heavy riff, Tony Iommi is a legend among hard rock and metal fans. However, if it were just for the heaviness of his playing and those iconic riffs, I'm not sure he would make this list. What secures his spot is his versatility and the broad range of styles which he brought into Black Sabbath. He doesn't get enough credit for all of the many dimensions of his playing. So yes, go listen to War Pigs and Iron Man and Heaven and Hell, but don't sleep on A National Acrobat, Sabracadabra, Megalomania, or Air Dance. At number 16, I have Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren is a multi-talented musical force of nature, but when you mention his name, guitarist, isn't usually the first thing that comes to people's minds. Most people probably think of him as a producer first, maybe songwriter second. He's a great singer and vocal arranger, perhaps because he's good at so many things, or because he's been making mostly electronic music for the last 30 years, that sometimes his guitar playing gets overlooked. But believe me when I tell you that Todd was one of the great American guitarists of the 70s. From the harmonizing leads on I Saw the Light to the solos of Black Mariah, Utopia's Hammer in My Heart, or Unloved Children, Rundgren's catalog is littered with dazzling guitar work. At number 15, I have one of the flashier players on this list, Eddie Van Halen. In a lot of ways, Eddie Van Halen is responsible for the self-congratulating speed fest that guitar playing became in the 80s and beyond. Even today, a huge portion of the guitar playing community are still chasing what Eddie did in the late 70s and early 80s. And while there are millions of guitarists who have surpassed him in terms of speed and technical ability, Eddie still stands tall above them all for his tremendous feel and sense of song. It's pretty easy to reduce his influence to the fact that he popularized tapping, but let's talk for a second about how great his rhythm playing was. Listen to the beginning of Ice Cream Man, Dance the Night Away, or Unchained. These songs groove more on the guitar playing than they do on the rhythm section. If anything, it sounds like Alex is playing to Eddie and not the other way around. At number 14, I have Michael Schenker. Schenker is a guy who influenced a million guitarists in the 70s, but today doesn't get cited nearly as frequently as he should for being one of the greatest or most influential guitarists of the era. As rock music began to get a bit heavier in the 70s, he was at the cutting edge, writing some of the heaviest riffs and playing the fastest, most melodic solos. A quick listen to any of his albums with UFO in the 70s and you'll immediately be able to tell how much of an impact he had on the next generation of guitarists. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that almost no other guitarist, apart from Eddie Van Halen, had more of a hand in shaping the sound of 80s hard rock and metal. All of his work with UFO is phenomenal, and there are plenty of other moments throughout his career, both with the Scorpions and the Michael Schenker group, that are worth checking out. But for me, nothing matches his work on the Force It album. Let It Roll, Shoot Shoot, High Flyer, Love Lost Love, Out in the Street, Mother Mary. It's just a killer record. One of the best hard rock albums of the decade, and just a tour de force of amazing guitar work. At number 13, I have David Gilmour, someone who's not underrated at all, but equally deserving of being on the list. Great tone, great feel, and amazing phrasing are really what sets him apart from other guitarists. I don't feel like I need to talk a whole lot about his playing. I'm sure most people are very familiar with his work, and anyone who listens to classic rock radio probably hears him at least several times a day. But he truly is a great guitarist, both as a rhythm and lead player, and someone who creates sonic texture with the instrument. He's really good at all of it. Some great highlights would be pretty much every solo on Dark Side of the Moon, Shine On You Crazy Diamond from Wish You Were Here, both Dogs and Pigs from Animals, Comfortably Numb from The Wall, On the Turning Away from Momentary Lapse of Reason, and What Do You Want From Me from The Division Bell. At number 12, I have Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck's career has gone through a lot of different stages, from time with the Yardbirds to his own The Jeff Beck Group, then a hard left turn into jazz fusion, an attempt at a Nile Rodgers-produced pop album in the 80s, and ultimately landing comfortably with a string of instrumental rock guitar albums with the occasional guest vocalist. His control over the instrument is unparalleled, as he's seemingly able to coax any sound out of it that he can imagine. There are highlights in all of his different phases, depending on what you're most into, but his concert video, Live at Ronnie Scott's, is something I think everyone can get into and should be required watching for any fan of the guitar. At number 11, I have Mark Knopfler. Mark Knopfler's playing is about as unique and identifying as a set of fingerprints. His fingerstyle picking and distinctive tone make him easy to pick out even before hearing his equally unique singing voice. His music seems to blend the old and the modern, as well as American music traditions with British pub rock and Celtic music. He's got a lot of great music under his belt, but I'd recommend the Dire Straits album Making Movies, his first solo album Golden Heart, and the Bob Dylan album Slow Train Coming, on which he plays to get you started if you don't know his music. At number 10, I have Lindsey Buckingham. Lindsey Buckingham is so underrated as a guitarist that it's almost criminal. It's likely this happened because he dropped seemingly out of nowhere into a guitar-centric blues rock band and transformed them practically overnight into pop hitmakers. Definitely not the traditional path to guitar god status, but Lindsey Buckingham is a true original, from his tone to his technique to his playing style. There's no one else like him, not to mention his ability to write timeless classic pop songs. If there's anyone out there who's still skeptical or dismissive of Fleetwood Mac because they don't have the hard rock cred, I'd recommend checking out World Turning from the self-titled Fleetwood Mac album, Never Going Back Again from Rumors, or some of his solo work like Rockaway Blind, Not Too Late, Time Precious Time, In Our Own Time, or Seeds We Sow. If guitarists weren't so allergic to pop music, maybe so many of them wouldn't have missed out on this incredible stuff. At number 9, I have Tommy Bolin, another criminally underrated guitarist. However, I think a lot more people would probably know about him had he not died in 1976 at the age of 25. Bolin played with a lot of people and covered a lot of artistic ground in his all-too-brief life. After early groups like Patch of Blue and Zephyr didn't pan out, he wound up joining the James Gang, two guitarists removed from the Joe Walsh era of the band. He played on the albums Bang and Miami. Around this time, he also played on Billy Cobham's Spectrum album, as well as another classic fusion album, Alphonse Mouzon's Mind Transplant. While recording his first solo album, he was asked to join Deep Purple, which he did, appearing on their 1975 album Come Taste the Band. He released a second solo album in 1976 before dying of a drug overdose in December of that year. His style is very unique and hard to describe, a blend of hard rock, jazz, blues, and R&B. Check out Do It, The Way You Do It by the James Gang, Golden Rainbows by Alphonse Mouzon, Deep Purple's Ode to G, or solo tracks like The Grind, Marching Powder, Post Toasty, and Busting Out for Rosie. At number 8, I have Mike Campbell, a nearly perfect rock and roll guitarist. He always seems to play the exact right part for the moment. It's hard to pick which tracks of his to highlight. There aren't too many moments of jaw-dropping pyrotechnics that would be immediately impressive to those who have somehow never heard him before. Instead, there's an entire career worth of cool little parts, a lick here, a riff there. Granted, he was working within the context of some of the greatest American songwriting of all time, but I can't think of another guitarist who would have done a better job in that role. At number 7, I have Elliot Easton of The Cars. Elliot Easton is another example of an extremely tasteful player who had a knack for finding the perfect parts for every song. There are a lot of Car songs where the guitar is providing as much of a hook as the vocals are. The other great thing about Elliot's playing is the way he composes his solos. Very melodic and hummable, and they always have an arc to them, almost telling a story of their own. He'd probably get left off of a lot of lists like this because he's not at all a flashy player, but to me he's absolutely one of the best ever. Some great examples of his playing are Touch and Go from Panorama, Since You're Gone from Shake It Up, My Best Friend's Girl from their self-titled album, and Since I Held You, Candy-O, and Got a Lot on My Head. At number 6, I have Ace Frehley. I have a pretty complicated relationship with the music of Kiss that I'll get into more someday when I do their listography video, but they were the first band I ever liked, and a big part of the reason I got into music. They were my superheroes, so to speak, as a kid. However, it's pretty apparent these days that Gene and Paul are terrible people. They haven't released any decent music in at least 2 decades. They seem to have very little in the way of musical integrity, exploit their fans, and wring out every last dollar from them that they can. When I say that I like Kiss and people inevitably bring up these points, I pretty much just have to nod in agreement. It's when they say that they're terrible musicians that I get a little bit irked. Are they unbelievable virtuoso players? No. But were they at one time a great rock and roll band? Absolutely. Especially in the early years before blowing up to superstar status, they were a down and dirty rock and roll band with a guitarist who played like no one else. Heavily influenced by all of the iconic British guitarists of the 60s, but filtered through 1970s New York, Ace's playing for me is still the epitome of what rock guitar should be. This could explain my distaste for a lot of these YouTube guitarists that are unbelievably talented, but have little in the way of attitude or danger in their playing. Listening to Ace, things always seemed like they were about to go off the rails, but he'd always get through it and just leave you feeling exhilarated, and the first 3 Kiss records are where it's at. At number 5, I have Brian May. The crazy thing about Brian May is how he is simultaneously one of the most distinctive and identifiable guitarists ever, while also being one of the most versatile. Queen were able to tackle so many genres largely because of Freddie Mercury's voice, but also thanks to Brian May's ability to shift effortlessly between styles without losing his signature sound. Most bands would have sounded ridiculous trying on so many different musical hats, but because the vocals and guitar were so identifiable, Queen always sounded like themselves and not like imposters. At number 4, I have Alex Lifeson. Alex Lifeson is probably the most overlooked member of Rush, with both Geddy and Neil being among the greatest to ever play their instruments. It makes it easy to forget how good Alex is as well. While one spin through YYZ or La Villa Strangiato should make it blatantly obvious that he's a great lead player, he's also a fantastic rhythm player. He also did great work in the 80s dancing around the band's more synth-heavy arrangements with an arsenal of arpeggios. For some of his best deep cut solos, head over to Counterparts for the tracks Cut to the Chase and Cold Fire. For some of his more subtle playing, check out songs like Emotion Detector from Power Windows or The Enemy Within from Grace Under Pressure. And of course, there's a bunch of other classic material as well that should keep any noobs busy for a couple of years. At number 3, I have Jimmy Page. It's hard to say much about Jimmy Page that hasn't been said a million times. He pretty much perfected the lead guitarist archetype with his swagger, his style, and his playing. Led Zeppelin are still the gold standard of heavy rock music, and although they've been heavily imitated, no one has ever really been able to come close to capturing the magic of their records. For some lesser-known gems, check out T for One, Sick Again, Achilles' Last Stand, Down by the Seaside, or the little-talked-about Coverdale Page album from 1993. At number 2, I have Ritchie Blackmore. Ritchie Blackmore, of course, is the legendary guitarist of Deep Purple and Rainbow fame. Known primarily for the Smoke on the Water riff, it's a bit of a shame that so much of his other work has been overshadowed by that one song. He was a tremendously influential guitarist and one of the first to bring classical influences into rock guitar playing. Although a few other guitarists began taking this approach around the same time, Blackmore was one of the only to take that into hard rock rather than progressive rock. Child in Time, Burn, Man on the Silver Mountain, Highway Star, Pictures of Home, Stargazer, Still I'm Sad. The list goes on and on. It's easy to see his influence in just about all hard rock that came after, and very difficult to understand why his legacy has slowly been reduced to one riff. And at number 1, I have George Harrison. Like Elliot Easton and Mike Campbell, George Harrison's greatness was in his ability to always play the exact perfect part. He was also a master of economy, never once playing a note that wasn't needed. It's impossible to overstate the importance or greatness of the Beatles, and the same goes for each of its members. As he moved into his solo career, he developed an even more distinct style of playing, which came from learning to play slide and combining that with his interest in Indian and Hawaiian music. I plan on doing a greatest guitar solos video at some point, but I'll just let the cat out of the bag right now. My favorite guitar solo of all time is from the Beatles' Something. So thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already yet, and hit the bell so that you get the notifications. But most importantly, please comment below. Tell me who some of your favorite guitarists are and what videos you'd like to see on the channel in the future. Thanks, guys.